Welcome everyone to Animated Critics Box Office Report for May 7th through the 9th, 2010. Biggest movie out last weekend was Iron Man 2, grossing $128 million over the weekend, which actually is far less than what people had predicted. Wouldn't you agree?
Initial box office estimates were around 133, and it came in 5 million under that, which means the studio even expected us to do more. Although it did expand on the previous Iron Man's first weekend, I just thought it was going to be bigger than Dark Knight because it had such a build up before its release. Didn't you think it had a chance at beating the opening weekend record?
Yeah, absolutely. It could have done much better. I will say that worldwide it is doing fantastic. It's definitely going to go far more than its predecessor did.
Yeah, even with that IMAX gross that boosts the overall ticket price, which inflates grosses, it didn't do that well. And it should be interesting to see what the fallout's going to be next weekend. If word of mouth gets around that it's decent, it'll have an okay hold.
I think the best thing Iron Man has going for it next weekend is it's opening up against Robin Hood, which I don't think is going to even come close to eclipsing Iron Man and knock it down from number one.
Yeah, even with a 60% drop, that would still leave it in the 50 million ballpark, and I don't think Robin Hood's going to make that in its opening weekend. So I do think that Iron Man 2 has another weekend to top the box office chart.
Next up, we have Nightmare on Elm Street, obviously the number 2 spot with 9.1 million. Do you think that this is going to continue to gross, maybe 60, 65 million like Jason, or do you think we're gonna have some sharper drop-offs?
I think it maybe makes 60 million. You know, it had a nice opening and a fairly decent second week drop off, considering that it was going up against Iron Man and it competes for the same audience. And if you look at previous entries like the Friday the 13th movie from last year, that had an 80% second week drop off. So it held okay. The problem's going to be now in its third week. It's not going to make much next weekend, and weekday grosses are just going to be low because it's going up against Iron Man. You know, we also had this week in third place, we had How to Train Your Dragon, which lost a lot of screens on IMAX to Iron Man 2, but still held respectively. And this movie's made $200 million so far. It seems like it's taken a long time to make that money, but it's the second highest grossing film outside of Shrek for DreamWorks. It's going to probably eclipse Kung Fu Panda here in the next week or so. Do you feel that this movie has had great legs because of word of mouth or the inflated 3D IMAX ticket price?
Well, I think that if you look at the box office tracking for How to Train Your Dragon, that it's definitely word of mouth. Obviously, you have an inflated gross from the 3D screens and whatnot, but this is a movie that really has done consistently well throughout its box office.
Yeah, it popped up to number one in its fifth weekend of release.
Of course, it's easy to go to number one when you're up against the backup plan, which we saw another pretty decent drop on, 31%.
The only thing that saved the backup plan was it had a fairly decent Mother's Day. It actually dropped only by about 15% from Saturday to Sunday, and that really saved its weekend. But this has got to be viewed as a failure, especially since Date Night, which is still out and still outperforming the backup plan, is encroaching in on $80 million. Next weekend, we have the opening of Ridley Scott and Russell Crowe's Robin Hood. Opening weekend numbers on that have been widely varied by different sources. What do you think the opening will that be?
I think it's got a chance at 40 million. I think, 30, 35 is probably realistic, but it's definitely not going to unseat Iron Man 2. It's not going to do anything amazing. I think Robin Hood is a story that everyone's already heard before, and there's not going to be a lot of interest in it.
Yeah, the trailers have been varied at best, and I don't know a lot of people that are excited about it in the way that other movies coming out this summer they're excited for. But nevertheless, they have a strong backing with Crowe and Scott, and I do think my numbers are in the same yours, 35, 40 million. But I see it burning out quickly, and I don't think it's going to reach 80 million total.
Thank you, everyone, for listening, and definitely check back next week.